and welcome to Speaking Spectroscopy. This is episode 3. In this episode, you'll meet Matthew and Angela. Angela's going to interview Matthew because he went to Graphene, which was in Madrid in Spain. We've been to Graphene before, but Matthew hasn't. This is Matthew's first time. Angela will find out what he experienced there and whether it was a worthwhile event for Edinburgh Instruments. We hope you enjoy.
Thank you for that introduction, CJ. And exactly as she said, previously I've attended Graphene in 2022 and 2023. We launched our Raman microscopes in 2019, and we've been looking for new conferences that we can attend ever since. Graphene is a great example of a very new area that we're moving into. It's something that doesn't necessarily apply to our previous product lines. However, since the launch of the Raman microscopes, we're very much invested in these new areas to explore scientifically. This year, however, I took a break from going to Graphene, and Matthew Berry went, who's our Raman application scientist. So how did you find going to Graphene 2024, Matthew?
I thought it was a really good conference. So Graphene is a conference where researchers who study graphene, transition metal dichalcogenides, hexagonal boron nitride, mexenes, any 2D materials, they meet up to discuss any applications that the materials are grown into and any new properties that they've discovered. So my background is actually in chemistry and then more biology. And this conference is very much based in solid state physics. So it was quite dense for me. But when spectroscopy was being discussed, I did find it very, very interesting. And compared to other conferences where I've been to, so MRS in America, ECS Spring, this is a much smaller conference, so it's much easier to navigate. When you're at these big conferences, it's hard to find where certain talks are and to even go to them all because you're required on the booth. But at this kind of conference, you can go to talks pretty much all day and then you're only needed on the booth at breaks. So very good conference. It's also in Madrid, which is my first time there. Very nice city, very warm, and loads of sights to see, good food. So very good experience.
Yeah, I definitely found that when I went as well, also being a more bio and chemistry background. The first time I went to Graphene, it was quite overwhelming. Hearing about the different words that the sort of material scientists use compared to what we typically use. Was there anything, I guess, that surprised you compared to what you'd heard about graphene before, either from reading the reports we've written about it or from me telling you what it was going to be like?
I would say that I expected it to be heavily based in academia. And my biggest surprise was that it was very heavily weighted towards industry. So every day, 9 till 5, there was an industrial forum sponsored by a different company. So people who are working in industry came and gave talks about what they're doing in 2D materials. It was very nice to see them being very transparent about what they're doing. There's also companies actually on the exhibit who create 2D materials and are selling them for different applications. So one company was selling powders and inks and graphene, hexagonal boron nitride to go in things like battery electrodes, thermal protection paints, and like composite inks. So it was quite clear, and this is what I really wasn't expecting, was that there's a big push towards commercialization, whereas I thought it would be people just doing R&D. People are actually wanting to sell these materials and put them into industry, make the world a bit better. I also had a lot of PhD students asking for career advice, which is pretty new. So people who maybe want to leave academia want to know what it's like.
I guess that makes sense with it being slightly more industrial focused now as well.
Yeah.
It gives PhD students a good chance to reach out to companies and see what companies
absolutely.
are doing where you're still close to academia, but also fully in industry.
Absolutely. It was also, so some conferences that the exhibit's not set up very well, whereas here they kind of had all the posters, drinks, lunch, everything was in the exhibit hall, so it got people loosened up and chatting. So.
Yeah, that's a very different thing about going to a conference in mainland Europe compared to some other places.
Yeah, exactly.
When I went to one in Aachen in 2022, you got beer at lunchtime.
Yeah.
I think you got wine in Spain.
Yeah, I got red wine. Yeah. I didn't have any. The main attraction though was the wee teddy bear. So we had the teddy doing a whole bunch of stunts. People quite liked it. I saw people taking pictures on the sly. So
Yeah, Eddie the Teddy, world famous.
he's a bigger attraction than the microscope. So.
So when we go to these events, we're always supported by one of our sales teams. However, the booth can be quite busy with lots of people coming up to us, asking us questions, and we are mainly there to provide that technical support to people who might be interested in buying a system. However, we do fortunately get to go to some of the talks and poster sessions, and whilst we can't get to them all, we definitely always try to get to a few. So from the sessions you could make, was there anything in particular that stood out to you from this conference?
There was a lot of interesting talks, but I'll just discuss a few. So one was a plenary speech by Professor Andrea Ferrari, who I only realised during the talk I've cited many times. So he was the first researcher to actually publish the Raman spectrum of graphene. I think it's got about 18,000 citations now. Anyway, he discussed AI, essentially. So he was saying that computer chips and these servers in California that do the calculations when someone uses ChatGPT or something, they're very, very energy intensive. And the silicon chips that they currently use, they use up a lot of energy just doing like any AI calculation. So he was discussing how 2D materials such as graphene could be used basically in the design of more sustainable chips for that kind of application, which was a big surprise to me. I didn't know anything about that. I went to a biological session and it was very interesting. So the main talk in that was a professor from Korea, and they were doing ECOG and brain scanning, which is putting an electrode on the surface of the brain. So they replaced gold, which is normally used, with graphene. And they did it in vivo animal models. And they were able to show that graphene had a better signal to noise ratio than gold. They were able to detect epileptic seizures in animals, limb movement, things like that. And they said that they're now working towards a graphene-based brain chip, which will be Bluetooth connected to sense kind of brain impulses. So it's really getting into the future.
Yeah, slightly Black Mirror vibes there.
Yeah.
And I guess, so when I went, the first year we went, it was all honestly slightly overwhelming hearing about all these different materials. And then last year, it kind of stood out. There was a lot more talks on mexenes in comparison to other materials like the transition metal dichalcogenides or graphene itself, or the HBN samples we've kind of discussed already. This year, what do you think was the current wonder material?
Maybe not so much a material. So mexenes wasn't as big this year. There was a plenary on mexenes and a session, but it wasn't like a main session. It was often one of the smaller rooms. The main thing was probably twistronics, which isn't specific to one material, but it basically involves stacking 2D materials and slightly twisting them. And by doing that, you unlock new electrical properties. So the keynote speech, the main speech from a professor from MIT, they were the first researchers to show that if you stack bilayer graphene and twist it by 1 degree, you essentially unlock superconductivity, which is obviously very useful for electronics, magnetism, things like that. There was a talk on Raman for twistronics. So this was for hetero transition metal dichalcogenides. And they were able to show using low wave number Raman peaks, around about 20 wave numbers, that when you twist with different angles, you start to see changes in the interlayer vibrations in the Raman peaks. So that was probably the main thing. A lot of the main talks in the big hall were based on that.
Do you feel the same having attended Graphene 2024? And is there anything you would maybe change from our booth or how we approach graphene for next year?
100% agree. It's a very good conference for us. People were very engaged. The topic was very relevant, a lot of spectroscopy. So those both mean it's an enjoyable conference. Next year, I think just having more content, more relevant content. We gave a poster this year. It'd be good to give a talk next year because there's a bit more presence when you give a talk. Blue sky for me as an application scientist, it would be good to have a working system. So people bring samples to conferences, other exhibitors have samples. People always come up and look down the binoculars with a microscope. So it would just be lovely, but it'd be very hard work to have a system that you can use on the booth and show people how it works. But that is easier said than done.
Yeah, it's worth noting when we say we took an RM5, we took a dummy RM5. So
Yeah.
there's no lasers in there, there's no detector. And we have taken a working RM5 to a conference once. It was just in Glasgow though, so it was very easy for us to get to. And it is really nice to be able to show somebody, actually, this is exactly what our system can do and exactly what it can do on your samples. Like you say, for the other industry exhibitors, they will have their samples of graphene or other 2D materials physically with them. So it would be a really nice way actually to interact with other exhibitors as well as the target audience of attendees. The only struggle is making sure we get past those laser safety requirements.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But thankfully, with our doors, we should be absolutely fine then.
Yeah. Give us a bit more gravitas when people come up to the booth.
That's true. Yeah.
Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed Speaking Spectroscopy episode 3. Stay tuned for further episodes.